It's a privilege to be here today and to celebrate 60 years of ministry with Brother Walls and the church here in Kentucky. I met Brother Walls before I had any gray hair, and I had a whole lot more hair than I got now. But let me just share this, and I know the congregation knows this, but I think it's worth mentioning, is that the people that are here today that are celebrating this occasion with you represent only a small fraction of the lives that you've touched in ministry. I myself, I'm one person here, but I represent literally hundreds of people that during a time when you were on the evangelistic field came through Missouri and made an impact in church after church after church, not just in Missouri, but the whole group that we were with there in that time, down into Arkansas and Mississippi and Texas. What I remember about Brother Walls, and I don't know how much time I've got, but let me just share this. And those of you, if I can get a witness and something I say, you just shout amen or wave your hand. But there was a dynamic of ministry that he had that we hadn't been exposed to. And you know, you talk about being slain in the Spirit now, and everybody's heard about that. But there were folks falling out before anybody had ever heard of falling out. And he came through, and I'll never forget, we were at a camp meeting. I was about 19 years old at the time. And I was at a crucial point in my walk with God. I'd gotten hungry for God, but I was at that point where I needed some direction. I needed something to happen in my life. I'd get on a roller coaster ride. You know what I'm talking about? I'd be up one day and down the next. And a lot of times people that were around me, I was a youth pastor in our church, and sometimes the young people determined whether or not I was happy. You know, when they show up for service, I'd get happy, and when they didn't show up, I wasn't so happy. But anyway, he came in. He was preaching a camp meeting up in Camp Allen, up just out of Poplar Bluff, Missouri. And my wife was there, and she sends her love along with Brother and Sister Russell. But when we went in to that camp meeting, Debbie, I'd been working. I drove up, and Debbie had been so impacted by the ministry that was going on there that the first words out of her mouth when I got there was, she said, Rick, and we were getting ready to, we were planning to be married soon. And she said, Rick, she said, something's just got to change in our life. I feel like God's calling us to something. And I sat in those services and began to feel the same thing. Later, Brother Walls came into Sikeston. He was preaching in for a Charles Warren in Sikeston, Missouri. And during that meeting, I'll never forget, I came up front for prayer, and when he prayed for me, it literally felt like somebody picked me up and threw me across the room. Anybody, can I get a witness in here? And literally, it felt, I hit the floor, and I thought, who did that to me? And I remember getting back up, and I don't know if he was messing with me, or but he just kept coming over. Every time I'd get back up, he'd walk back over and lay his hand on my head, and there I'd go again. And I finally just decided to stay in the floor. So I said, God, I don't know how much more of this I can take. And what God was showing me, that there was a power to His Spirit and presence that I hadn't seen before, hadn't tasted before. And we began to have Brother Walls in revival, and he came in at a critical time. I'd been praying, and I'd gotten so hungry, and I said, God, I want a double portion of your Spirit. I'd been fasting and praying for that. And when he came in, and you've got to understand, what I'm going to talk to you about it wasn't a blessing, and it wasn't a touch. It was a transformation in my life. And I went up front, and when I went up front, he said, what is it you want? And I said, I want a double portion. I'll never forget, he looked at me and he said, are you sure? And I wanted a double portion more than I cared about living to see the next day. I was hungry. And I said, yes, sir, I'm sure. And he touched me, and when he did, I went out. And the best, what I tell you next, I've gotten from people talking to me about what happened later. But the best they could, they got me and put me up on a pew someplace. And I was there. Sister Walls was with him at that time, and she said, I came to him. When I came to her, I looked over at her and said, when did you get here? We've been in revival for over a week. And they carried me home that night and took me and put me to bed. And on the way home, I was saying, my name is Rick McNeely. I live in Sikeston, Missouri, and I work at Piggly Wiggly. I had my name right, but nothing else was right. I didn't live in Sykeston anymore, and I didn't work at Piggly Wiggly. But you see, I had been praying, and I said, God, I know you're powerful, but I need to know on a personal level how powerful you are. And that night, He showed me. I was literally out of it. I got up and drove back to my pastor's house and didn't know how I got there. It got so bad, they said, I kept asking them over and over and over again, what happened to me? Where am I at? What happened to me? They finally called Brother Walls. He was staying down at Gary and Becky's house, my brother and sister-in-law. And they called him and they said, look, we're concerned about him. I mean, he hasn't come around yet. What's wrong with him? Brother Walls told him, said, he'll be all right. God's just doing something in him. Well, about 2 o'clock in the morning, Sister Russell finally said she had to look at me like a child and said I'd been up and down all night long, and she looked at me and said, you go in there and go to bed right now. And so I went in there and went to bed right now. It wasn't long until I was up again. About 3 o'clock in the morning, my soon-to-be wife, they put her on the couch, and I was in the back bedroom, and I'd gotten up and wandered into the living room, and Debbie said she felt like she felt a presence in the room, and when she opened her eyes, I was about this close to her face, and she opened her eyes and I screamed, and I said, please, tell me what happened to me. And she looked at me and she said, Rick, would you just leave me alone? It was on up to the next day. Brother Walls had to come and get me. I had an appointment to go meet someone, and I was still out of it. I couldn't get my bearings together, so he came and drove me. Or no, actually, I was driving, and he said, where are you going? I said, I really don't know. And they told him where I was headed, so he had to tell me how to get there. And what that did was it changed my life forever. It changed the dynamic of who God was for me. And you can ask anybody that knew me before and then knew me later, things were never the same after that. I ended up quitting my job and going into full-time ministry. And this year we celebrate 20 years of being on the road. Hallelujah. We've been traveling. I've ministered in, I think, some 20 countries. We've gone in and literally taken hundreds of people into other countries. And the theme of our ministry, we founded what was called Christ to the World Ministries. And the theme of our ministry became God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Because if there was one thing that I learned, I wasn't just in service with Brother Walls. I had the privilege to be able to spend time with him. I would go to the house where he was at. He stayed, the first time he came, he stayed in a little apartment that I had. The next time they moved him up to the big house. And then I got to stay with him and share time with he and his family. And it was those special times when even we weren't in church that he would talk and pour into me. And those things forever changed me. And there's one thing that I discovered is that, you know, if you hang around someone, they begin to rub off on you a little bit. And so in ministry, when I started evangelizing, I had people coming up to me and they say, you remind me of Brother Walls. And I thought, well, that was probably the highest compliment they could pay me. But what I've discovered is this, is that God's not looking for extraordinary people. He's just looking for an ordinary person that believes He's an extraordinary God. And when you let that happen, it changes things. My sister-in-law, and I'm not sure if Gary and Becky are going to be here. Did they call, or do you know? But let me just share something that happened. We were at that camp meeting that I talked about, got so intense. My sister-in-law was expecting a baby. She went up for prayer, and I'm talking about, man, she was big pregnant. She's ready to go any moment. He prayed for her, man, and she bounced on the concrete. I mean, that was before anybody caught you. You know what I'm talking about? She bounced off of that concrete, and she went to then she went on, and he came for revival. She was still pregnant. He prayed for her one night. She went to the hospital and had the baby, and she was back the next night. Somebody say that's God. And it changed things. It changed our family. It changed the church. And it changed the way that we looked at God. And I brought a gift with me today for Brother Walls. And what this is this is from Debbie and I. Not only do we celebrate 20 years in ministry this year, we've been married for 30 years come October. And I turned 50, if you can believe that. I went from 19 years old to 50, and I can't figure out where all that time went. But this year is also what I just gave to him is Debbie and I published our first books this year. And so those are books that we've written. And I can honestly say that my life, I don't believe, would have had the impact that it's had it not been for the impact of this man on me. Amen. Can we give Jesus a hand of praise?